atomic gigantification was a sweeping Japan nation when along came a dude with an ultra attitude, a common rider who's the greatest kicker of Japan. And of all, man, life's too short now, baby, to not talk big now, baby.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to a brand new episode of Kaiju Conversation Live. I'm your host, Elijah, and joining me for the second time, this is the first time I've ever had a guest on twice, so clearly I did something right when having him on the first time. We have Jack, aka G-Man, on.
How you doing, guys?
So we're here for something that's kind of not what I intended Kaiju Conversation Live to be, because typically we do like these relaxed, like no topic conversations, but this was something that I felt necessary to do. So a little background, and then I'm gonna hand it off to you, Jack, so you can kind of give a little background here. So I've watched 3 Christopher Nolan movies in my life. All of them are the Batman movies. I'm a very basic Nolan fan, if you could even say that, because I don't even like those movies. But Rex, my co-host, texted me and said, I'm on my way to see Oppenheimer today. And I was like, wait a minute. Why have I not, I want to see this movie. It looks fantastic. The trailers look great. Why haven't I begun watching the movie? Why don't I have tickets yet? So he texted me, and then I immediately went and bought tickets. And then you were talking in our Discord server that you're in, and you said, and I quote, "Are you seeing it in IMAX?" And I went and refunded my tickets and went and bought IMAX tickets for the following day. So I saw it opening night, and I actually got some pretty good seats. And prior to that, you had seen it Thursday night, so you saw a preview. And the way you talked about it, I was really interested and I was a little confused on how this film did what it did for you to react that way. So I was going in I was really curious. I was really, really curious. And I was glued to the screen the entire time. And I would say that I had a Fabelman's moment. For anybody who has watched the live streams in past or has talked to me at least and has heard my thoughts, The Fabelmans is probably one of the best films I've ever seen in my life. That's a very personal movie for me. And Oppenheimer had the same effect on me. So I was like, okay. But even before that, you and I talked about the film. I just wanted to hear your thoughts. And I was like, you know what? We need to do a review. We need to talk about this movie. Because it's kaiju adjacent. I use that in very I hesitantly say that because I feel like that's in a way devaluing the worth. I don't know if worth is the right term, but I feel like that's ignoring the film for what it is to an extent. To be perfectly honest, this film it's a film. It is the definition of film, peak cinema. So for me, it was ignoring the fact that there's World War II, Japan, atomic bomb stuff, I just want to talk about this movie. I just want to enjoy talking about this movie because there's this movie does a lot. So we're just going to be here. We're going to talk about the movie. This is a little more of a we're going to put thought and effort into the stream more so than past streams where we just kind of relax and just talk about whatever and see where it goes. We're going to first talk about the non-spoilery stuff, which is most of the film because it's a historical film. So we know bombs fell on Japan, and we know Oppenheimer helped create the bomb, and scientists were involved and whatnot. So like, you can't really spoil it, except for the ending. The ending does do something to make it to make a statement. It makes a statement, to say the least. So we're going to talk about that and some other spoilers at the end, or closer to the end of the stream. I don't know how long we're going to go. We're going to talk until we've kind of hit all of our notes and all of our thoughts. Now, I've only seen it once, but I know Jack here has came prepared. So I'm going to hand this over to Jack to kind of establish his stuff.
Came prepared. I don't know. I've been spending too much time watching the movie. I saw it for the third time today, and like you said, I saw it the preview night Thursday. Saw it yesterday and again today, and I still don't feel like I have enough. It was. You and I talked about it. I felt like it was a drug that I just couldn't get enough in me. It was. I sat there watching it, and you especially, I wanted you to see it on IMAX because I knew this picture would. It was designed to be just massive. And when I say that, a lot of people say, you have to see this on IMAX because it's a big action adventure. There might be a giant monster on it, or it's a big disaster, a big special effects movie and stuff like that. This is a biopic. It's a biopic drama shot like a horror epic. And it really comes out with the whole IMAX experience and the sound and whatnot. I mean, I've seen it 3 times, and each time there are moments that the sound makes me jump. And it is very impressional on me. This is one of those movies, and it's been a long time, actually, since I've walked out of a movie somewhat speechless. I could probably count on one hand where that's happened with me. And even, I don't really review films anymore. When I did write for a city paper and some magazines and stuff, I was kind of, they kept saying, you have this word count to work with, you have to rate it, or something like this. And even with the freedom of just kind of doing a blog, I don't entirely know what to say about this just yet, which is going to make this conversation interesting. I think a lot of people have said this is the culmination of Nolan's entire career and whatnot. I don't know. Maybe, probably. Who knows? I will say this, though. It's a great film. Which seems just like, well, no kidding. But like, it's so easy to be reductive in both praise and in panning a film. And for something this powerful, and for something this on this scale of quality, I just don't know how to put it in words quite yet. Am I still in the honeymoon phase? Yeah, probably. Definitely. But, so having seen it 3 times, there's just not a whole lot I dislike about the movie either. I think this picture is it shook me. I walked out, and one of the first things I said is, I am shook. You mentioned the ending. The last 2 shots was enough to terrify me. I think so. I was talking with someone recently, and they said the last 2 shots made me sad. I was like, well, that's interesting, because the last 2 shots made me scared. Really, really felt horrific to me. And I found it interesting that, we had 2 emotions, maybe negative, I guess. from those last two shots. And I recently read that Nolan had, and this means nothing to you, Elijah, but I recently read that Nolan compared the ending of this movie to the ending of Inception. And I was like, man, I want to sit on that for a while, because that's very, very fascinating, especially considering, coming home, driving back home tonight after watching it for the third time. I'm sure there's something better I could be doing. I know there's something better I could be doing, but I just can't. And I all I could think of is this. Well, I don't want to get into it too much. We'll dive into it with the spoilers, but it sticks with you, most certainly. And the rest of the film, not to say that the whole movie is about the ending, that is not the case by any stretch of imagination. And the whole ending, people, one of the first things that a lot of people have asked in our circles has been like, oh, it's about the guy who made the bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. I'm like, yeah, that happens in the movie, like the event happens, but that's not what we're working here with. We're working with something even like the ramifications of the existence of what this man has created is something the movie is diving into on an even grander scale than that. And it's interesting how his life, at least the dramatization of his life here, is exploding as well as the ramification of the existence of this weapon has come to fruition. And everything just comes together so well. And at every shot, every line of dialogue, smart, quick dialogue, I might add. I think one of my favorite exchanges is when of dialogue, my conversations in the movie, is when Groves meets Oppenheimer for the first time. And Oppenheimer says, it's my job to tell you no. Oh, so you have the job now? No, I'm thinking about it. And everything in that scene just works beautifully. And it blew my mind that even the most simple of shots, even an over-the-shoulder or medium shot, can look just gorgeous in this movie. Just because of the depth of field and the framing involved. And then there's the music by Ludwig. I can never get his last name right. Can you? Ludwig.
Let me. I'm gonna look at his name.
Anyone here who wants to correct me on that, because I'm all for it.
I'm gonna attempt this.
But the music was fantastic. I'm a big film score buff. And I'll be honest, I haven't liked a whole lot of scores from this particular composer. He's done the Mandalorian. He's done, I think, Black Panther. He did Tenet, and I didn't care for his score for Tenet either. But he really grabbed me here.
So, Ludwig Göransson.
Göransson. I'll let you say that if we need to for the rest of this cast. But he, earlier in the movie, someone asks Oppenheimer, "Can you see the music of the universe unseen, of the quantum universe and whatnot?" He said, "Yes, I can see it," and goes into this kind of like musical composition of dancing light and particles and stuff like that, cut in with him working and him exploring and learning more about it. And that was just, an amazing marriage of music and sound design with visuals, gorgeous visuals that are not CG. There are two movies that were released this year that delve into the quantum universe. And I find this one infinitely more interesting to both learn about and look at while watching these pictures. That not to say that I've actually seen all of Ant-Man 3. I've only seen it in parts, couldn't finish it, stopped. So it was something that was just married together. All the components, all the parts were married in such wonderful sync that, you know, when you get to the last act, which I wondered if the last act went on a little bit too long, but given all the twists and turns and high drama that happens in that last act, I'm fine with it. I have, you know, I could rewatch that last act right now, actually. In fact, Elijah, do you want to stop this cast altogether? We'll meet up and we'll go see the picture again.
I would love to.
I'm going to see it for a fourth time. I will say it right now. I'm going to throw money at this for a fourth time. I can't get enough of it. And you and I also talked about this. This isn't necessarily about the film itself, but the Thursday night, I was surrounded by people in this IMAX. It was sold out. We were crammed in there. All right. And everyone was into it. And everyone was glued to it. People were gasping, and, you know, some people were even like doing a little cheers when, you know, in the back half of the movie when certain events happen in Oppenheimer's favor. And after those last two shots happened and we cut the credits, people started applauding. I have now seen this movie 3 times to packed, sold out IMAX showings. Today, even, I noticed people were trying to sneak in because they took my seat and my friend's seats. And I said, "Hey, these are ours." And they're like, "Oh." And they get up, and I watched them during all the trailers try to, you know, sit down in different places, but people kept coming in and be like, "You're in my seat." Sometime during the first act of the movie, someone walked in and he had a sling. Someone walked in. He just sat on the steps and watched the movie. No way he paid for a ticket. He just sat on the steps and just was into it. And once again, for the 3rd time in a row, applause. I was in shock. This isn't a Marvel movie. This isn't a big IP action adventure or anything like that. This is just, it's a biopic. It's a biopic shot like a grand epic, but it's a biopic. And man, it just felt so good to be in a theater where people are so invested in a movie like this and are gasping and are applauding and are cheering, moments that in any other movie you wouldn't audibly hear these reactions to. But it just felt so good that something of such a grand experience was being embraced like this in 3 showings. I can't tell you the last time, if any time, I've seen the same movie in theaters 3 times and people have applauded at the end of each showing.
Yeah, see, it's funny you bring that up, because so when I went to see it, during the film, there were moments where I was like, I want to clap. Like there was moments where it was like, this is like mind blowing. And I was hearing people laugh at certain scenes and gasp and like feel emotion. And I was like, okay, so we're going to see what happens at the end of the movie. So where I live, nobody really claps. I've only been in the theater twice for a movie where people clap, and that was Spider-Man Far From Home and Avengers Endgame. And the people who clapped for Far From Home was like a small group of people that like sat in like the left side of the theater. They were all in a group of friends. And I was like, I wonder what's going to happen here. I was like, what am I like waiting for? So the movie concluded, and I was like, I don't care if I'm the only one clapping. I don't care what like I'm clapping. It was one of those things where it's like, I need to clap. Like, this movie has made me feel so much, and I've been glued to the screen this entire time, all 3 hours and 7 minutes. Like, I never looked away from the screen. I don't know if I blinked. Like, that was how like focused I was. And the credits started, and I started clapping, but other people, like, it was everybody was clapping. There was some cheering, and I was like, this was such a it was a magical moment, just being in that room that was packed, and people were clapping at this film that I still couldn't look away from the screen. Like, the credits were rolling and my eyes just were glued. I was reading every credit. I couldn't fathom what I had just seen. And I didn't move from my seat whatsoever. Like, I was just determined to just sit there and just soak in everything I had just seen. And I kept clapping, and I think I ended up being the last person clapping because, like, my brain, like, it just, I couldn't think. Like, I was caught in the moment of what I had just seen. So I can relate to you on that level, on the way that the the experience of going to the theater was.
Yeah, and it was just nice to have that experience with something other than a big IP blockbuster. Not to disparage those, I mean, I've enjoyed, MCU's been the whipping boy for a lot of us, but I like the MCU. I enjoyed the first Iron Man a lot. It's still my favorite MCU movie, and I think the culmination of what it led to with Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame was an incredible and successful experiment overall. You can't deny that. I mean, it really the audience embraced it. A lot of people have come to love it. A lot of people have come to know a lot of these characters through these movies, and I think it did a good job of it overall. Now we're at a point where, well, we know the game. We get what it does. We know how this is played. We know what to anticipate because we've already had it, and we're not entirely sure if the same thing will work twice for the next 10 years.
Mhm.
And I think that's largely why we've seen a little less interest in the MCU, a few more vocal opponents of it and stuff like that, because, well, we had the MCU. It was fun at the time. We want something else. Now, I'm all for, if the MCU bounces back, I'm all for enjoying it. Should it happen. But right now, I'm really embracing the idea, the hope at least, that some audiences want something else. Because as I speak right now, Oppenheimer is number 2 at the box office. Very impressive, given that its main competition was Barbie, a PG-13 movie that's shorter, and a lot of people can more easily see because it's not R, and it has more showtimes because Oppenheimer's 3 hours long. You can't give that movie quite as many showtimes. And Oppenheimer still made, I believe, 81 million, 80.5 million.
I think it's 80.5.
Yeah, 80.5. We'll see if that's adjusted any by Tuesday. Wow. So it's only the 4th time in film history that 2 movies have opened on the same weekend and both have made over 50 million. And it's the first time in film history that 2 movies have opened over 80 million in the same weekend.
Which is, I was telling somebody at my showing I said, it's amazing because the theater was full of people for Oppenheimer and Barbie. Like, it was insane how
Yeah,
full the theater was. And I told the guy who was talking to me about Oppenheimer, I said, it's amazing to think just 3 years ago, we were all like, is the theater experience dead? Are we like AMC's going bankrupt? Like, is this the end of the theatrical experience? And some analytics people were saying that it was, and a lot of people were like, streaming's the future. But here we are 3 years later, and this happens. Like, this, and I told the guy, I said, the fact that I'm standing here in a theater at 10:30 at night and it is packed full of people, happy, cheerful, buying popcorn, like getting ready to go into a showing, and we're all here to support like these movies and enjoy them. And then to hear that Oppenheimer does double what it was projected, because it was projected 40 million, if I remember right.
yeah, 40 to 50 million. And it, yeah, doubled that 40 million.
And like that's like, I love that, because that just goes to show how many people were excited for this. And like, Oppenheimer didn't have a lot of marketing, like officially. A lot of Oppenheimer's marketing came from the joke of, let's go see the double feature, Barbie and Oppenheimer, the Barbenheimer, kind of the joke that everybody was making. And it's so amazing to see two films like completely different. Like, you couldn't get any more different, do so well. And I feel like this just shows that the idea of the theater going experience will not die for a very, very long time because of these.
I mean, I hope so. I hope so. I mean, we have to kind of remember that Christopher Nolan's name carries a lot of weight. I mean, he's like an IP unto himself. Barbie is IP. This has been a long time coming. But the fact that it is, you made a point that it is two very different films doing very, very well, and we as an audience really embrace that, does say a lot, because both these films opened higher than Fast 10, Transformers, Rise of the Beasts, The Flash, Indiana Jones, and Mission Impossible. And Mission Impossible had like a 78 million domestic opening over 5 days. Oppenheimer did 80.5 in 3 with competition from Barbie. You know, and I've run into some people who are saying, well, the only reason that both did so well, especially Oppenheimer, is because of the Barbenheimer trend, the social media trends and stuff like that. I'm like, guys, there is no proof, and has never been any proof, that these social media trends really helped that much. I'm sure it did a little bit, but I don't think that's the reason Oppenheimer had an extra 40 million in the tank. There's just no way. You know, it's like, I'm always reminded of, and this isn't necessarily social media, but I think the point stands. In 2010, what was it? Scott Pilgrim. Scott Pilgrim versus the World had a trailer at San Diego Comic-Con. Back then, San Diego Comic-Con was still huge. I mean, like 4 to 7, 8 times the people who are there now were there back then. And Hall H opened to the Scott Pilgrim panel, and allegedly it got the biggest reaction at San Diego Comic-Con, bigger than any other movie, comic book movie or whatnot. That was the film that everyone was the most vocal about in Hall H. And people thought, man, we got a hit here. We got this is guaranteed slam dunk at the box office. I think it opened 4th or 5th. It bombed completely. I mean, it was one of the biggest bombs of the year. And since then, both studios and box office pundits have been a lot more careful about putting that much stock into niche trends like Comic-Con or social media or, hashtags on Twitter and stuff like that. I mean, we all remember what happened when Sony re-released Morbius for a weekend just because of social media trends. I mean, come on. So my guess is that the Barbenheimer craze probably added revenue in the thousands, not the millions. More, what I think the Barben craze symbolizes is an excitement to embrace something outside the IP that we have been getting in recent years, which is largely comic book superhero. And like at this point, like the 10th sequel to some long running franchises and stuff. Not that like Indiana Jones is the 10th, but the 5th in a very old franchise. Mission Impossible 7, Fast and Furious 10, Transformers 7. And, I kind of, the MCU, I kind of look at as a giant television show where every episode just happens to be like 2.5 hours long. So you can, they're on like the 30th episode. Anyway, the fact that, there was such great admiration for these two movies this weekend, I think hopefully is symbolic of studios wanting to do different content. I don't want to necessarily say original because Barbie, still a pretty big IP. Oppenheimer, still based on a book. Christopher Nolan, he's an IP himself. But something a little bit different. Mm-hmm. And that's an exciting prospect, I think.
I agree. And so speaking of different, I think this is a great place to dive into our kind of we've given our overall thoughts and shared our excitement with how Oppenheimer and Barbie have been doing. I want to now dive into something that was a little different, which for me at least it was different, but Oppenheimer's story. The way the story is structured is so interesting. And it's kind of like a murder mystery in the way it's structured, because you gradually learn the facts as the story's told. And Nolan does a very good job at using visual aids to help tell the story. And I loved that. I loved the change between black and white and color. I loved the way the story was structured. I'm not one to like non-linear stories, but the way this story was structured made the 3-hour runtime feel shorter for me, because I was so invested and I was asking so many questions in my head. I never had time to stop and think, man, how long have I been sitting in this theater watching this movie? Like, what time is it? Is it 1 a.m. yet? I never thought that. I was so busy trying to like follow the story and understand, and I was so like just involved with the story that I never thought, how long has it been? Where are we at in this movie? Is it almost over? I never thought that. I never even thought, where's the bombings? When are we going to get to the bombings? I was like, I want to learn more. I want to get these answers. So I loved the way this story was structured, and I know going in you said to not expect something linear, and I think you were a little nervous that I wasn't gonna like that. The way, at least that's kind of, I thought you might. The way I understood it, you might have, you were thinking potentially that I might not be able to follow, or maybe I wouldn't like how nonlinear was in all the questions that I would have to ask. That like made it so much more interesting, and just it involved me with the plot so much. And I loved the story for this movie.
Yeah, I think when I talked to you about it, I was just afraid because you mentioned that you've only seen so many Christopher Nolan movies, largely the Dark Knight trilogy, which I adore wholeheartedly. But it did occur to me that the only film in the Dark Knight trilogy that's really told out of order is Batman Begins. Even then, after at some point in the movie, it kind of normalizes to like one, linear piece of storytelling. I would say most of the other movies Chris Nolan has done are very non-linear. And he once said something in an interview that, what was it? He said, I've realized something that like he realized that if he told the audience something just one time, it would be enough. Whereas if he was redundant about something, it would become unnecessary, and the audience would kind of be like, okay, yeah, it almost confused them hearing the same thing twice in different ways. Nolan has an absurd amount of trust in audience intelligence. I would argue sometimes too much, but he has an amazing amount of trust. He doesn't think his audience are idiots, which is evident because he made the movie Tenet. And as such, and this isn't to say I think you're an idiot, but as such, I can find that sometimes his shifting into different moments in time can lose people because he's so confident that people will follow it. And we jump all over the place. I mean, if you're not paying attention to the dialogue and the setting, or when something's black and white or not, you're going to be lost because he's quick about it. He is real quick about it. And even me, upon the first viewing, I couldn't quite get the timeline just right. Like there were some conversations that were going on in the film that I thought were happening at a different point in time, and upon seeing it 2 more times, I've realized, oh, it happens earlier or something. And the fact that we have basically multiple stories going on at different points in times, and it keeps cutting back and forth to these points, especially when some of the drama is going on a crescendo, really adds to the kind of epic feel. You almost feel like you're in an action sequence or a giant battle or something. One thing in particular I loved, I don't think this is a spoiler, but I loved how we kept going back and forth between the Oppenheimer hearing and the Strauss hearing towards the end. And we have Strauss giving this like impassioned, belligerent speech, and we have Oppenheimer being basically interrogated, and it's just going up and up and up and up and up, and they keep cutting back and forth faster and faster and faster, and the music is crescendoing, and we get some stylized directorial decisions in there that I don't want to bring up just quite yet. And it was like we are being assaulted by 2 dramatic points in time. and it helped our investment. It was shot and edited in a way that might as well have been a car chase. And I was on the edge of my seat. It worked. It really worked. And for me, I like movies that I can go back to. I like movies that have a lot of meat in it that demands me to rewatch it. If there's not a whole lot in there, if there's just kind of a lot of fluff, I tend to not go back to it quite as often. But if there's something in there that I feel I may have missed, or that I can just continue to understand better and better upon multiple rewatches, then I'm going to go back to it. It's got me. And this is one of those movies. And I think that's one reason why I want to keep watching it and keep going back to see it, is because I still feel like there's stuff I've missed, or I still feel like there's dialogue I've missed that would make some things clear, or I still feel like I've missed some piece of the puzzle that really makes the themes clearer and stronger and whatnot. And that, for me, is exciting for future viewings of the film. I'm excited to continue to rewatch it now, because what am I going to find? What am I going to unearth? There's a lot of movies out there that I watch over and over and over and over because I think maybe there's something I missed. I'll tie this back into like some kaiju stuff, since this is technically a kaiju conversation, right? 54, Godzilla 1954. I rewatched that actually a lot because I think there are some nuances, some bits of dialogue, some ways that characters interact with each other, touch each other, don't touch each other, that have a lot to do with the time period, the culture, the themes. And I like going back and seeing if it's still there, if I missed it, or experiencing it and whatnot. Same thing for this movie. There's a lot going on, and something with so much gravitas I would hate to miss.
Mm-hmm.
And that's art, I guess, is something that you can just keep going back and learning.
Absolutely. See, what you brought up on the edge of your seat, and that was something that I called Rex after my showing. Granted, most of the time I was silent because I didn't know what to say. But in the theater, I remember like there were moments where I was leaning forward, and there were moments that I like got on I was on the edge of my seat. I was like, where are we going? Like, what? I was so invested with it that I was like, I had to be as close as possible. Like, I had to be in the moment. I had to be there. And it was so almost surreal, because it's hard for me to get that invested into a movie that I'm like, I need to be there. I need to be in this moment. And honestly, that's a part of the magic of the movies, is being able to put yourself in that world, whether it's an alternate world, like an alien planet, or an alternate time, like in the 40s, or in the future, or on a different continent. Like the fact that I was able to put myself, like I felt like I was there watching it all unfold. Just it was a very surreal part of this film for me. And I remember just watching it, and to my understanding, the stories are the development of the bomb kind of being told in flashback while Oppenheimer's being interrogated, and kind of explaining everything while Strauss is doing his hearing, I believe, after the interrogation. I believe.
Yes, it was after.
And then you have certain moments that they take place after the events of the flashback, if you will. but they occur before in the movie. And we're talking about I'm talking about the opening with Albert and Oppenheimer and your reaction. So this is also being recorded for the podcast. Jack's reaction right here, just like that sells everything. I know.
Wait, can I at least tell? All right, before you continue, what was the thing I asked you to do?
So I
you
remembered this.
Yeah.
I remembered it. I was like, okay. Jack said, keep questioning why Albert looked the way he did at Strauss.
Albert Einstein. Yeah.
Yes. And I was like, okay. So I watched the sequence and I was like, wow, what did he say? I was like, was it something like, did Robert like insult him? Did Oppenheimer insult him? Is it Albert Einstein and Strauss have a history that's not good? Like, what? I was like, what is this? What's this element? And when that moment,
we might need to start getting into spoiler territory. I don't know.
So my goal is at the hour mark. So we're about 47 minutes in. So at the hour mark, we're going to go into spoilers. So for anybody listening, that's the plan. And for anybody listening to the podcast version, that's the plan. So once we hit an hour, we're not going to beat around the bush. We're going to go straight in. We are going to dive into what makes this film honestly one of the most thought-provoking movies I have seen in a long time. But the story, for me, it was unconventional. It was an unconventional way of telling a story. And I loved that. Like, this film, it's funny because the only reason we really got this movie the way we did is because Warner Brothers turned their back on theaters. I got to talk about this because this is the greatest, the greatest screw you in the history of screw yous in the film industry. So Nolan, who is established with Warner Brothers, says, I'm done with your company and moves to Universal. So now I honestly, I came to this realization. Universal has produced, honestly, some of the best films in the history of cinema. I mean, they have Nolan, they have Spielberg, those two are honestly, I want to watch more Nolan now because of Oppenheimer. I will watch more because of Oppenheimer. But it was while watching it, I came to that realization because both The Fabelmans and Oppenheimer are some of the only movies to leave me speechless. So it was great to see Nolan with this film from Universal. This was his first Universal film since he left Warner Brothers. And it was just great to see Nolan have the ability to have that creative flow. Universal clearly knows they have a gold mine of creativity, and I love that. And it's obvious they let him do what he wanted. And I think that gives the film so much. It gives the film a voice that is very loud, very clear, and very concise. And before we keep going here, Michael Hamilton wanted to just say that Jack is giving off Surfer Chad energy.
Thanks. I'm actually I'm growing it out for the beach actually. So
that works.
Sorry, Michael. I won't be keeping it for -1. Maybe it'll grow back out by then. I don't know. We'll see.
So I really want to go into spoilers, but we still got about 10 minutes. So
well, I mean, we were talking a little bit. One thing I did want to add about the narrative structure, the non-linear storytelling. I just wanted to add, and I told you this before, Tarantino once criticized biopics, a lot of biopics these days, for, you know, spending too much time going through a person's life. You know, this person was born on a rainy, thundery day, and, you know, in that moment he was fated to become a great physicist or something like that, you know, kind of that stuff. And Tarantino always said, and I kind of learned to agree with him. He said, don't do that. Just isolate the point, a point in time, a stretch in time that was the most important of this person's life, and dramatize that. You know, make that the heightened drama that we need to know. Don't try to dramatize a non-fictional character being born and fate him with, you know, the soon-to-be task of creating the nuclear bomb. It's not. let's not do that. Let's just go straight into, here's where it kind of started, and go from there. And I really appreciated that this movie, you know, at some point he tells us where he was born, where he's from, and stuff like that. We don't see it, only because that wasn't the most important information to see. It was exposition, but was like throwaway exposition. It just gave us an idea of where he's from, and, you know, why he goes back to where he does in New Mexico. So I really loved the fact that this movie didn't Forrest Gump Oppenheimer. That's kind of a term I've been using lately. It didn't Forrest Gump. It didn't start the very, very beginning and dramatize childhood, teenage years, and whatnot, going all the way through the Manhattan Project. And it didn't go that far into the future either. We see a glimpse of his future. I don't want to bring that up just yet. We see a glimpse, but it doesn't go too much into it. That glimpse was only because of something another character says. Mm-hmm. And it was really refreshing to see a non-Forrest Gumped. And I want to make clear, I know Forrest Gump was not a real person, I think. And but a lot of biopics are structured the same way as that film. And they don't need to be. This film did it great. And it probably did something that a lot of biopics don't do, was not just non-linear storytelling, but just scattered storytelling, just all over the place. We are constantly cutting to, you know, if this is the timeline, we're right here, but then we're right here, but then we're right here, then we're back here, then we're, you know, it doesn't, there's no real consistency other than dramatic consistency. Right. And that whatever we're cutting back and forth from and to is dramatic to the themes and the point in the movie that climaxes the drama.
Right.
And that's what was most important.
And, you know, speaking on the drama, I avoided most of this film's like press. I had seen the countdown trailer, which is what sold me. That countdown trailer that was on that live stream is probably one of the best trailers I've ever seen. And I chopped that up to the sound design. And the sound design in this movie, like, people said Tenet had some good sound, and I've heard it also had horrible sound. It depends. Like, some people like it, some people don't. But for me, Oppenheimer is like, and really, like, I want to say this: awards don't matter. They really don't. Not for a film like this. Like, it doesn't need to prove itself. But if this film does not get nominated for an Oscar in sound design, I don't know what the Academy expects. Like, this film is very intense. It's stressful, and that kind of mirrors like the scenes, like the quick cutting, the subjects of the interrogation and the trial and the flashback sequences, everything's so stressful, and we're kind of put into the mind of Oppenheimer for a lot of the film, and it's obvious that there's a lot going on. And I love the fact that the sound complements that. The sound makes that all the more relevant. And I don't know if I've seen another movie that had the impact the sound did for this one for me. Like, the score is a different story. Score is like, I'm not even talking about music. I'm just talking about the sound design of the movie itself. No music, just dialogue, the sound effects, and what that brought to the table. And there's a specific sound that I told you about that you said everything, like when you see it or when you hear it in the movie, it's going to kind of blow you away. And I'm specifically talking about in the countdown trailer, there is a sound that is very fast, very loud. And that's honestly, like, if I'm going to be honest, the one thing that sold me about this movie was that sound. That single sound is what made me say, what is this? When can I watch it? Because that one sound made that trailer horrifying to me.
Can I ask what your thoughts were when you realized what it was?
At first, I was like, no way. Like, really? I was a little disappointed, but then that disappointment went away when I realized that it wasn't what I expected, but it made it more scary. It made perfect sense.
This may be our first spoiler conversation in about 2 minutes here.
I honestly, I kind of just want to dive right into it. Like,
let's do it, because I think that the scene that we're kind of beating around right now is one of my favorite scenes in the entire movie. Maybe my favorite scene. I don't know.
Okay. So I'm gonna, if you're watching the stream, we're in the spoiler section. We're entering the spoiler section because I have to talk about this, because this scene, I think this was when I was so far gone with reality. Like, I didn't realize, like, I honestly forgot I was in the theater. I forgot that I was watching a movie. I was so, it was hypnotic. That's how much the sound was. So after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, obviously America is happy, the war is over. But the film talks about, or it brings up the heavy weight that had on Oppenheimer. Like, he just killed thousands of people. That's kind of how we viewed that. But he has to give a speech. He has to lift up his crew, his team, for what they just did. They just won the war. The war of all wars. Like, World War II was the nastiest war of all of them. And they just won. They just finished it. That team of people successfully ended the war. But Oppenheimer didn't view it necessarily like that, at least in the film. And so as he's walking into it's a gym. As he's walking into this gym, the sound of the cheerful soldiers and scientists and wives, they're pounding their feet. They're clapping their hands. and in a very artistic fashion. Like it's not realistic that everybody would fall in unison, but it doesn't have to be. That is the beauty of the art. And all of their feet begin in unison. And the sound echoes in Oppenheimer's head. And my anxiety went up when as he's walking to, give his speech, the sound gets more intense. And as he gets up to the podium, he's just entrapped by this sound. And you can, in the background, and there's a few visual things like this where the background becomes blurred and it starts shaking. Like in a way, I kind of viewed it as he's losing touch of reality because he gets stuck in his head. And the echoing of the foot stomps and whatnot echo, and he doesn't know what to do, because on one hand he has to, celebrate they won the war, but on the other, he just helped kill thousands of people, thousands of innocent people. And I don't know if I can articulate just exactly how intense and amazing this scene in this film is.
I think the way it climaxes is it definitely begs to be studied as a scene, because as it climaxes, we see a white light as if a bomb is dropped, and this is not actually happening. Of course, it's all in his head. Maybe it's all in his head, or maybe it's just a dramatic interpretation of how he feels, like a bomb dropping on him, or he feels the weight of the deaths, or maybe he doesn't necessarily feel the weight of the deaths. Maybe he feels the weight of the world he has changed. But there's a white light. We have a brief glimpse of one of the wives or whatnot with like skin melting off her face a little bit. And after he delivers the speech, he's walking away, and he feels like he steps in something, and he looks down, and it's the charred body of someone who has died from the heat blast. And as he continues to walk, he sees, a variety of things. He sees two people making out under the stands of the gym. He sees another couple, they're crying and whatnot. He exits, he sees someone who's puking outside. And then you see kind of the windows, and it's kind of hard to tell, but are people cheering? Are they wailing? Are they? The sound design kind of tricks you. It could be cheering. It could be wailing. It could be some sort of. I almost got a weird, sense of like, is an orgy going on in there or something like that? Not in the sense that like it's actually happening, but is it like a? Are we supposed to get the idea that the people in there who helped him create the bomb are these, magnificent sinners or something like that in a gym or in a church-like area that are kind of, doing a mass deed? It's unclear. Not that any of this is literally happening, but it feels like it's a amalgam of emotions that have transcended the norm and kind of manifested themselves into the movie. And that's what gets me about this scene, is that there are so many ways to look at this. There's so many, theories and ideas you could like toss into a conversation about just this one scene. And again, it's another example of sound design, music, in this case, the lack thereof, because knowing where to put music and where to not put music is a huge part of, why any movies work. Certainly this one. The cinematography, you mentioned, the background kind of pulsing behind him. It all comes together. That scene alone could just be a short film.
Yeah.
Like a proof of concept or something like that.
And
it stands on its own as an incredible example of the tedious anxiety that this movie kind of gives off.
right. And in a way, I kind of felt like this scene kind of echoed the quote. He does say part of the quote or earlier in the film. And this is a quote that Kaiju fans will know from the 2014 trailer. Now, in the actual recording, minus the "Now I've become death, the destroyer of worlds," minus that part, he mentions how I believe it's something along the lines of some I know it by heart, but now I can't think of it. Few people laughed, few people cried,
Most people were silent. I remember the Bhagavad Gita, a scripture from the Bhagavad Gita, where Ishmael persuades the prince to do his duty, and in doing so, he takes on this multi-armed form and says,
"Now I've become death,
the destroyer of worlds."
And in a way,
we're all kind of waiting for him to say that in the movie, right? It's
yeah. And he does say that when the bomb goes off. But in a way, I feel like he says that in this scene, but he doesn't actually say it, because some people are laughing, some people are crying, many are silent. Like, we don't hear them. And deep down, he's thinking, I have just unleashed the most destructive weapon on Earth. I have become the destroyer. I mean, they say that there's a almost 0% chance that the bomb could absolutely destroy the entire world.
All right, let's sit on that one. Okay. So there's a moment in the movie, and they never forget. They never let this go. They always kind of circled back to it for a reason. There's a moment where they thought that they could ignite the atmosphere and destroy the planet. And supposedly, depending on how big of a bomb we make, which according to this movie and according to everything else I've read, and I'm not a expert, but good heavens, I don't think I want to be the more I look it up. There's no limit to how powerful we make these things. Scary, terrifying. But if that's true, is there a point where we can actually ignite the atmosphere? Because the chance is not zero.
Yes.
But almost. and that's horrible. Oh my gosh. That was one of the points in the movie where they said that we might ignite the atmosphere and destroy the world via calculations. That was a point in the movie where my jaw just dropped. They dramatized that so well. Like, this is a fear. This could happen. And even right before, just moments before they actually detonate, go through with Project Trinity, Groves said, "Hey, what did that guy mean out there about, atmospheric ignition?" Oh, well, earlier on, there was a point where we thought that, we might destroy the world.
Yep. And it's like, wait a minute, what? Like,
they never told Groves this. He goes, yeah, but the chances near zero. And I love Matt Damon. Man, he near zero. He has, what do you expect on theory alone? Zero would be good. And we all laugh at this, and I laughed at this, but I'm laughing out of discomfort, really, because
Right.
oh my god, you know, we willingly hit the button on this thing, multiple of these things, knowing that it's almost zero, but there's still a possibility. And then that goes all the way back to, of course, the ending of the film, which we have beaten around the bush a lot during this conversation.
I almost don't know if we should talk about that yet, because that is like that part of the movie just
Nightmare inducing.
it is the biggest, it's honestly one of the scariest things I've ever seen in a movie.
Well, like I said, it was framed as like an epic horror, right? And it's funny because like we don't see very long glimpses of these could be's and would be's in the movie, or even glimpses of the quantum universe as Oppenheimer sees it. But what we do see is so good looking and so beautiful and so fascinating. You know, if this is what, when he studies this stuff, if this is what he sees, it almost makes me go, oh yeah, I want to be a quantum physicist. I wouldn't want to be a quantum physicist. But the fact is, that's how he, the character, sees it.
Right.
And that's what made him so enamored with the study of it.
Right.
So
It's in a way, and I'm all about films, so I think about movie the way Oppenheimer sees the quantum like realm, I guess, if we're using Marvel terms, is kind of how Spielberg saw the train wreck in World's Greatest Story. Like it was embedded in his head.
yeah.
In a way, I feel like both Oppenheimer and The Fabelmans are kind of the same story, but on two different like playing fields of destiny, in a way.
Or appreciation. Yeah. Like it's they both see an art there that they can tackle, right? And they do. Through whatever tragedy and hardship that comes their way.
Yeah.
Interesting parallel. So
But yeah,
here's okay. We're in the spoiler discussion. Here's something I think needs to be brought up. Louis Strauss, because we are, you know, everyone loves Robert Downey Jr. I love Robert Downey Jr. I was blown away by how he looked in this movie.
yes.
I was blown away by his performance in this movie. And I was not necessarily in shock, but in some sort of like glee over how they handled the twist that he's kind of the villain here.
Right.
Or the movie's framing him as that, as an antagonist to Oppenheimer, out of what? Pure jealousy, out of vindictive jealousy because Oppenheimer made him look bad years beforehand. And I love the what was Aldrich's character? His name, the one that was kind of a liaison.
The lawyer.
What now?
Was the lawyer, right?
Yeah. played by young Han Solo. Well, let me pull it up real quick here.
But the way, and what I love is his
You think
scenes,
after watching it 3 times?
his scenes with Strauss, you kind of learn as Aldrich's character learns. Like,
no, he doesn't have a name.
I love that. Actually, I love that.
Senate aide to Louis Strauss. Senate aide. We'll call him Senate.
His character is like, in a way, he's the audience.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there so many of the audience members applauded or laughed at his lines because at towards the end there, when Strauss says, "Oppenheimer should be thanking me," and then the aide says, "Well, he's not,"
Yeah, yeah.
and everyone laughs. Um, yeah, and he was just as surprised as the audience was when Strauss ended up being the one proverbially, you know, holding the knife, not caught holding the knife, but holding the knife that, ruined Oppenheimer's credibility and made sure he was no longer part of the Security Council. Mm, he and what gets me is how petty he is about all this. He did this to Oppenheimer, not necessarily for political gain, but to just because he was petty and vindictive. He didn't like that Oppenheimer made him look bad. He just didn't he didn't like it, and so he plays this long con, convincing Oppenheimer that he's kind of on his side, even though both he and Kitty, his wife, know deep down that Strauss is behind all of this. And he plays this long con. He tricks even the aide for why, just to show how smart he is once the aide realizes that he's been ahead of the curve the whole time, and is so upset. And he brings this up at the very beginning. He says, "I wish I knew what Oppenheimer said to Einstein and that soured him on me." He keeps bringing up how Oppenheimer forced Einstein to not like Strauss the entire time. He is so petty. He's all about this, like, I have political power. I'm doing this for political gain, yada, yada, yada. I'll give you another Godzilla parallel since we're in Kaiju Conversations. In the original film, in Godzilla, there is the diet building meeting where two different groups end up in an argument about whether or not they should make the existence of Godzilla public, because they don't want to, cause damage to international relations, because Godzilla was awoken by the atomic bomb. Bringing radiation, the atomic bomb, into the discussion, that could make things a little tense. Later on in the movie, we see Godzilla attack the diet building and walk straight through the exact wing where they're having that conversation. Politics doesn't matter to him. It doesn't matter if you're going to argue about this. It doesn't matter about, international tension or whatnot. What he is and what he stands for is here to remind you and kill you, and it doesn't matter, And then you have Strauss in Oppenheimer, and he is so self-absorbed about his career and about being liked by these scientists that he thinks it's all about him. He thinks it all revolves around him and his career and his politics. And at the tail end, the aide, tells him, maybe Oppenheimer didn't say anything about you to Albert Einstein. Maybe they were talking about something more important. And then he opens the door, and Strauss has to take on his loss, because he was going to be, his entire hearing was to potentially be part of a cabinet member, but none of the scientists in the country liked what he did to Oppenheimer, so he didn't get the job. He didn't get the position. And that was his defeat in the film. And as he goes out to the press to accept his defeat, the aide reminds him, or doesn't remind him, the aide puts him in his place. Maybe they weren't talking about you at all. At all. Showing just how small he is, and how small he is compared to the entire, theme of the movie that he just didn't get.
Right.
So,
and I love the fact that throughout the film, we, initially his aide kind of is on his side, very clearly is on his side. And as his aide starts to learn about what he's been doing behind the scenes, he kind of turns on him. Like, you can tell in how the actor's facial expressions are there. He's starting to question if he's making the right decision. And it's such a like, and there's no dialogue that suggests that. A lot, like all of it is in his facial expressions. And this film is full of amazing acting. There is not a bad actor in this movie. I was shocked how every supporting character, every main character, every actor and actress in this movie, like Downey does not seem like Robert Downey Jr. I love that. Rami Malek.
Do you think because of the story, the director, the importance of the themes, and the talent on display, all these actors came in to bring their A game because they just knew how important this project was?
That's a great question. And I don't know. Like, it's so weird that this movie has some of the best acting I have ever seen.
Well, and you could, even the tiniest roles in this movie, they all act like they're some of the best actors in the world. They carry themselves with that conviction. And I'm just like, what kind of locker room pep talk did they get from Nolan for this movie? Jesus.
You're absolutely right. Like, and I'm just going to keep bringing up the Academy Awards because I like, that's how amazing it is. Like, all these actors deserve that award. Like, there should just be best, like, cast.
Ensemble. Yeah.
Best ensemble cast. And they should all win. Like, it is remarkable how amazing everybody is. Everybody takes this very seriously. Everybody knows their role. Everybody, like, even Rami Malek, who has a pretty low level, like, role in the film, like, knocks it out of the park. Matt Damon knocks it out of the park. And Matt Damon, I've loved his acting since, like, Ford versus Ferrari. Like, he did an amazing job in that film. And he brought that back. And it might have even been better, to be honest. Like, it blew me away how amazing everybody was.
And to your point about Rami Malek, I mean, Rami Malek got the, I saw him in the film earlier on. I was like, wow, they really cast Rami Malek in like a nothing part. And then here comes the climax, and he's the one who actually delivers the death blow to Strauss's cabinet position. And I was like, didn't see that coming, because he owned it. Gosh, he owned it. He was very, very. There's a moment where Rami Malek, one of the staff asks him a question, and it's almost like he didn't catch it, he didn't hear it, and he has a pause. And he goes, "I'm sorry, say again, please." And then they ask a question again. It was so real, it felt so natural, but it almost feels like something the actor did, not
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was so satisfying because he seemed so timid throughout the movie. To watch him come in and essentially sledgehammer Strauss like that was, I keep comparing this to, like, epic action flicks and stuff like that. This was Rami Malek's epic action death blow to the villain.
You're absolutely right.
It was so good.
And I just like that moment. That was a moment my jaw dropped. I wasn't expecting that when he spoke up and he said what he said. My jaw dropped, and I wanted to clap. Just my whole body filled with, like, kind of like the Captain America lifting Thor's hammer, like that payoff. And what's funny is, like, I have no attachment to this character. He was in the movie maybe 5 minutes, but when he comes in and delivers that blow, it shook me. It just I had.
And that's the word, Elijah. Yeah, it shook. I am shook is what, I walked out and I said that. I'm just like, and that's one reason, is because so many things came out of left field, but was so natural, and honestly set up for that stuff too. We didn't know it at the time. It made such an incredible impact. I'll tell you, we talk about jaw-dropping moments. Earlier in the film, when they've almost completed the bomb, and after they've dropped it, Oppenheimer tries to convince scientists and the war secretary that, if we drop this bomb once, if we make an example out of it, it will create everlasting peace for the entire world. No one will ever want to, go to war knowing that these things exist. I don't know if in reality he actually believed that. I don't know if he actually believed that in the movie, but it seems in the movie that he had to convince himself of that. And it was jaw-dropping and heartbreaking towards the end. And I spoke about this earlier when we were talking about non-spoilers. Towards the end, when he's in the conversation and he's in his hearing, and once again a bright light is shining on him as he's being berated, and they ask him, when did he have ethical misgivings for the bomb? And he said, when I realized that we would actually use these things. And that was a turning point for him, because he beforehand, he thought no one would dare use these things if they saw how destructive they were. But now he realizes that we would. And that is disheartening. It's sad. And it's terrifying. It's still terrifying today. And that gets into the larger theme of the movie and whatnot. Strauss was so obsessed with himself, he didn't even understand the movie's themes. He should have been watching it. He didn't even understand the movie's themes, the overarching theme, that it wasn't about him or political gain or pettiness or people liking him. It was about what humanity could do with these weapons. And by the end of the film, I'm sitting here thinking, I'm kind of terrified. Scratch, not kind of. I'm terrified of living on a planet where these things still exist.
Right.
And the movie did its job. It didn't glorify the bomb. It didn't preach to us either. I think a lot of the fear that the film bestows upon me and the audience was strictly visual and far from preachy. And I've mentioned this before. This was not a PSA. This wasn't propaganda. It was about a man's fear. A lot of people's fears, actually. A lot of people were fearful of this. It's about fears being projected onto us, and once sitting with us is a stark reality. And that's when you realize the look on Einstein's face at the end is really the perfect expression of fear and pain and hopelessness and disheartenment about the topic.
And I want to touch on something, because I know there was some concern that the film would glorify the bomb, or it would glorify the government or the army or Oppenheimer, or like But what I appreciated is the film didn't, like you said, it didn't preach, but it gave us the facts. It gave
Yeah.
us both sides. It talked about how it would end the war, and then we found out like other things, like the like it would end the war, but it doesn't pick a side. It doesn't pick a side. It just tells you how the story went.
Right.
And I loved that. I loved how Nolan didn't feel like he had to make a stance on the subject. It feels very much and he does this. There's objective and subjective moments in the film. That's what the black and white and the color is supposed to represent. So there is not a moment where he makes a subjective opinion objective. He makes it very clear, quite literally very clear, like what is fact and what isn't. But he doesn't say it's fiction either. He tells it as it is. He's not saying this is the bottom line. He's just saying this is how it was.
Yeah, well, and I do want to bring up, I want to be careful about, saying that everything in the film is fact and whatnot, just because I'm
Right.
sure plenty was dramatized and whatnot. I know what you're trying to say though, and I think what it is that it never really decides to pick a side
Right.
on any subject. We get into communism and communist ideas, but then Soviet communism and the difference between the two and stuff like that. None of that is trying to convince the audience of anything. It's simply making a comment about who these people are. Nolan has always been fairly, I don't want to say apolitical. That's not the case. He's not apolitical, but he's fairly neutral because, again, he trusts the audience to make to figure things out themselves, to make an informed decision themselves. I don't think he's ever tried to sway the audience one way or another. He's fairly neutral about it, just putting out there what history has given us, more or less, and dramatizing it, and then letting the audience decide, good, bad, I don't know. I thought it was very, very interesting that in the film, Oppenheimer was convinced that the bomb being dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima was to end the war.
Yes.
Finitely. If the bomb wasn't dropped, a lot of American GIs would have lost their lives invading Japan, including my grandfather, who fought in the Pacific Islands. He was slated to invade Japan, so he wouldn't be here. He wouldn't have been here, and I wouldn't have been born. That's just how it is. Was Japan defeated regardless? Yeah, but they weren't going to surrender without us invading. So the bomb dropping was terrible, but a solution that probably took less lives. Now, that being said, later on in the movie, after the bomb drops, Oppenheimer kind of mulls over the things he's been hearing about how the war was largely over. Japan was already defeated. They just dropped a bomb on a defeated nation. Probably, yeah. That doesn't mean he still didn't save American GI lives, but yeah, no, he probably did drop a bomb on a nation that was already beaten.
Mm-hmm.
And as such, he felt later on that there was blood on his hands. And he told us the Truman, who played brilliantly by Gary Oldman. And Gary Oldman, he's only in that one scene. Blew my mind. They got him for just that one scene, and he knocked it out of the park. And he leans in. He takes the handkerchief out of his pocket. I love this. And he kind of waves it at Oppenheimer and said, do you think the Japanese care who made the bomb? I'm the one who dropped it on them. He was taking the flak for it. He was the one responsible for it.
Mm-hmm.
It was interesting because even Strauss said, I'm the one who helped Oppenheimer get known for Trinity, not Nagasaki and Hiroshima, so he should be thanking me.
Mm-hmm.
To which the aide replied, well, he's not. And, man, the moral quandaries in that. I'm just glad that presented, two different modes of thought. And take it, the audience. You do with that what you will as you get more wound up in the anxiety of this picture.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like they also explore, like, at the end of the day, I don't know if I could say Oppenheimer is a very selfish individual or if he's not, because I mean he takes a lot of credit for that, but then he also has his moral dilemmas with that. But then there's also the was he really the one responsible, or is he just owning something that he only partially helped with? And there's some moments throughout the film where he's like, I didn't do a whole lot in this, and then he'll say, this is on me, like this is my fault.
Well, it's interesting because I don't think one of the most fascinating things about this particular protagonist is he's not exactly a great person. He's an important person. But I mean, let's get it out of the way. He's a cheater. He's a womanizer. He's, it could be definitely insinuated from this movie that he definitely put work or his enthusiasm for quantum physics over family.
Mm-hmm.
Is he selfish or not? It's an interesting question. Yes and no.
Right.
Is probably the best answer because you're right, he does flip-flop a lot. He is he's one of the most complex characters Nolan has put together, in that there's no, like the movie, he's not very linear,
Right,
in terms of his thought. He goes back and forth. He bounces. He can't answer questions. When he's being berated at the very end, right before he says, I started having moral doubts about this when I realized these weapons would be used for war. He can't give a candid answer to the Grey Council. He clearly had a hard time understanding himself what he thought. And
right.
it just adds a layer of dimension to an already interesting character simply because he's the man who headed this project.
Right.
So
Now, to go on a little bit of a lighter note, here we have a comment from Thomas Bicknell. Why is Alden, I always butcher his last name, Enrich, on the right, and why is he reviewing his own movie? Slash J.
Well, man, I didn't think people would find out. I'll tell you why. Because I'm just that damn good looking in the movie, and I really want to sell the film a little bit more so I can get jobs where I actually play a character that has a name.
That was the best response you could have given.
And I also really want to do Solo 2.
I don't know if I would want you to do Solo 2.
I don't want to do Solo 2. That was a lie.
But, you know, I appreciate that this movie is not... Nolan offers a ton of questions and gives some answers, but also leaves the film a lot to interpretation, like you said. And he doesn't... It's a movie that shows and it doesn't tell, which is something I appreciate, because there's a lot of movies that will tell you, but they won't show you.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know...
There's a lot of both.
It does. And, you know, Oppenheimer, you know, obviously the bomb is the main, like, overarching thought.
Event, maybe? Is that
event? Yeah. But the bomb is only really, I mean, it's what's driving the plot.
Yeah.
Is the development of the bomb, but the bomb itself is only maybe 10 minutes of the film.
Mm-hmm. I think it's more that the conclusion of the bomb is what is where the themes really come in, and the movie, or at least the movie, finds its theme.
Right.
Because, yeah, he makes the bomb. Yeah, the movie is largely about him putting a town together for the Manhattan Project, and, you know, Project Trinity and all that stuff. But what does it all mean once it's all said and done?
Right.
And again, that's lands a slam dunk in the last 2-3 seconds of the movie, and we probably need to go ahead and get it.
So before we do that, okay, there's only one thing.
I'm
like,
scratching. I'm like, oh, we gotta get into
this. So we've talked about the sound, we've brought up the score, we've brought up the acting and the story. Now, there's one thing that I love about this film that Nolan did that created such a real experience, and that's the fact that this film doesn't feature CGI.
Yeah.
And that,
damn,
like, everything that the film shows is real, and he uses techniques to get those shots, and it only adds to the realistic aspects of the film and grounds it so that when the theme finally comes in, that it really hammers home.
I think Nolan has usually been pretty resistant against CGI. Not resistant, but he prefers practical work because he believes the lack of polish in practical work gives off a more natural feel and chaos that digital effects can't really convey, because it's all very planned. It's all extremely directed and whatnot. This isn't to say he didn't use plenty of CGI in, like, Inception or some shots in the Dark Knight trilogy, but even in those instances, he still tried to use practical effects as much as possible. For example, in Dark Knight Rises, the thing that Batman flies in, they actually built, you know, a life-size one of those, and they had it dangling from some wire going down streets and whatnot. obviously they had to CG some shots of it. Obviously they used digital effects to clean the wires out of there and stuff like that. But he prefers his actors and his staff to react to something that's actually there. In Tenet, he was very resistant against CGI as well. He actually did roll a 747 into a building. But here, it's even more difficult, I think, to do that here, because we do see visions of missiles flying through the air and a quantum universe, which is just light particles and whatnot. And we see explosions, multiple explosions, and we see the planet Earth burning, you know? And you sit there going, no CGI, whoa, and I know I haven't read up on it. I know he's given away some of the secrets. I also know that a lot of the effects were done on kind of a microscopic level, through chemicals and whatnot. And I'll say that it reminded me of the film The Fountain. Have you heard of that film by Darren Aronofsky?
I think I've heard of it.
Okay, The Fountain is another one of those movies that left me with, dragging my jaw behind me as I exited the theater. Not a lot of CGI in that either. A lot of it is done, under a microscope to convey the special effects and whatnot. And I got a similar sensation with that here as well. And it was just so effective and so good to see again, because it just felt and looked different. And I'm one of those audience members, everyone's like, a lot of people like, oh, he just hates CGI. It's not so much I hate CGI, it's just I'm kind of tired of looking at it, because it all kind of looks the same. Right. The human eye at this point can detect when something is CGI, and we overuse it to such an extreme level that just gets exhausting to see weekend after weekend after weekend after weekend. It's become less of a tool and more of a kind of like fast food answer to special effects. Right. There are other ways to do this, but it's much quicker and more efficient and more reliable if we do it this way. So that's how we're going to do it. And they do it. And here we have, I'll say it, an auteur who is determined to create these visuals a different way, because he believes it looks different and it feels different, and he's right. And you know what? For as few special effect shots that are in this movie, I don't care about the Academy Awards. I haven't watched them in years at this point. I couldn't tell you what won last year. But it would be hilarious to me, absolutely hilarious, if in the 2024 award show, a movie won for special effects with no CGI. I would think I'd be laughing. That's all I'll say. And I don't particularly care if it happens or not, because again, like I told you over the phone, I think more people will remember this movie than most movies that get nominated or win plenty of awards.
Absolutely.
So
now we're getting close to 2 hours, and I feel like 2 hours is kind of a good stopping point. And I feel like we have plenty of time here to talk about something that I didn't expect. And that was what Nolan did for the ending. So in the movie, Oppenheimer visits Einstein to show him some calculations that prove Einstein wrong. If I remember correctly. Am I correct?
are you talking about the atmospheric ignition part.
Yes, the paper.
Yeah, he showed Einstein the atmospheric ignition math that said if they detonate this thing, it could set fire to the atmosphere.
And when Einstein and Oppenheimer meet again with Strauss, trying to get Oppenheimer to join the security, would that be the security cabinet technically?
No, the AC, the atomic,
AEC.
Yeah, AEC. That's it. Yeah,
Atomic Energy Committee, right?
Committee. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, the AEC. When
again, I've
Strauss
only seen it 3 times.
when Strauss is trying to get Oppenheimer to join the AEC, Einstein is out just kind of enjoying life in nature. And Oppenheimer walks up to Einstein. And this is all in the beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
Now, we don't see or hear what they say, but we've brought up how Einstein does or doesn't look at Strauss after their interaction, and Strauss thinks it's about him.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end, when we get the statement, maybe they didn't talk about you, maybe they're talking about something more important, it finally tells you what they talked about. And Oppenheimer went up to Einstein and basically said, remember that paper I showed you? Did you feel like that was essentially the end of the world? Like that paper?
Yeah, that paper's... Do you remember those calculations that said if we launch this thing, we could destroy the world? And Einstein replies, yes, what about it? And I feel like I'm stealing your thunder here. Do you want to
go ahead. Go ahead.
And then Oppenheimer says, I think we did. And then Einstein, incredible performance by, oh shoot, who played Einstein? It was actually a, fairly well-known actor, Tom Conti. That's it. Tom Conti played Einstein. And his face, he wasn't even smiling. His face just droops. Like complete and utter, I think we did destroy the world. And Einstein just, and then he walks past Strauss. And that was the face he had at the very beginning of the movie when he walked past Strauss. And Strauss thought, oh, he made Einstein hate me. No, it was something more important.
It was the realization that they had officially went somewhere they can't come back from.
Mm-hmm.
And then from here, we get footage of Oppenheimer's visions of being on that jet and seeing the other jets fly past him from the window of the cockpit. And then we get this sequence of, in the clouds, these missiles flying into the air. And then it cuts to a sequence of the world burning. And when you told me that this movie made you fear living on a planet where these weapons exist, and kind of made you rethink and kind of made like Godzilla 54 hit deeper, and you've even posted on Twitter how things hit a little harder. I was not expecting Nolan to go to world domination, but that is the end. And anytime somebody's talking about nuclear weapons and nuclear war, it ends in that fear of, if that were to happen. And Einstein said it. If World War III were to happen, World War IV would be fought with sticks and stones. Because you can't go back. That is a weapon of mass destruction that has the power to annihilate the world. And you've said it, like the thought that we live on a planet where those exist Like if somebody gets trigger happy and hits the red button, that could be it. Like that is a fear that is hard to fathom, but this movie articulates that fear. And it's a fear that our kaiju movies like Gojira, the Japanese, understand.
Yeah. And not just Godzilla. I think I also mentioned like Terminator or
Right.
something,
Right.
or it makes it a little more real. Because everyone said, there seems to be this overarching thought that no one's insane enough to start World War III. I don't. I don't have that at quite as much confidence, given some of the world leaders we've had in recent years and are still in power. Listen, I'm a collegiate coach, and I had a guy on my team who is part of like the ROTC, and he had to leave the team because he was going to be part of the ROTC. And when the whole stuff in Russia started taking off, he said, he told me, there's a chance I may be fast tracked to be deployed. He's a kid. I don't want him deployed. I don't want any of my kids deployed and fighting in something that might just end up with a bunch of missiles incinerating the world. And so that this last year has been kind of real for me, facing the fear that I could genuinely lose some people I care about to morons in power who don't have the foresight to understand they could ignite something much larger. And then, art is such a powerful thing when it reaches you. Everyone says art is subjective, but very rarely does anyone say art is for the individual. Specific art will touch different people in different ways. And I get to the end of this movie, and the reality of Oppenheimer's fear has never seemed more realistic to me than it is today when listening to athletes I work with that are a part of the military. And so I watch this glimpse of a scene where the earth is on fire. I think it was supposed to be atmospheric ignition at the tail end that we saw. We saw two things. We saw the earth and like multiple nukes going off, and then we saw the earth and then a firestorm covering the globe. As messed up as things are in the world, if we go down the path that Oppenheimer fears in this particular film, we are definitely going to wipe the slate clean with those problems. So, there's a choice now. We either, we figure it out, we fix it, or we can go down that road and take a gander at what the Stone Age looks like for any survivors. And it just felt very real. I wonder, from the personal experience that affected me, I wonder if it contributed to what Nolan was doing with the ending of Oppenheimer. But I still feel that even if I didn't have that experience, I would still have that fear. I would still be imbued with that terror of the image of the world on fire.
Right.
And one wrong move from one stupid person, and that's what it looks like.
Right.
So this movie, it ended on a perfect note. It ended on a perfect note. It ended. We keep hearing what Oppenheimer wants to do. We keep seeing what he's trying to do and what he fears and whatnot. But nothing. It was the perfect pin in the cap to really ram home just what was causing all of that anxiety in him.
Right.
And the look on Einstein's face, I like to think that he was envisioning what we saw visually as he walks by Strauss. Because what really is that? Is it something Oppenheimer is imagining? Is it a future that we've yet to get to? Is it a dream? Is it just the film giving off a warning, and maybe the characters aren't thinking about that? Doesn't really matter, I don't think. I think what matters is that the possibility exists and the character's fear is real.
Mm-hmm.
And that I don't know if any film that I can think of in recent years has been able to get something that real across in a long time.
Right.
So,
And what you just said kind of reminds me of a quote from a certain movie about fear and reality and what that could bring. I'm trying to pull it up so I can get it exact. I think you know where I'm going with this, or maybe you don't.
I'd like to hear the quote.
I'm trying to. So this is in context. It's from a Godzilla movie. But I feel like you can replace Godzilla with the bomb, and I mean it's supposed to, like, Godzilla is the bomb. So I feel like this kind of works. You have your fear, which might become reality, and you have Godzilla, which is reality. And in a way, that's you have the fear of nuclear of a nuclear apocalypse, which might become reality, and you have the bomb, which is reality, and the bomb could lead to that fear, which could become reality. So next time I part of me I'm happy that I watched Oppenheimer before -1, because and I'm not going to make the joke. I'm not going to make like I'm not going to do that.
I'm already sick of that one too.
But -1 is going to be it's in direct response to that, to what Oppenheimer is talking about, to what the fear is, the fear of nuclear war. And we're going to see kind of that perspective from the Japanese in that time period where Japan was zero from that. Japan is the only country to have civilians killed by A bombs and H bombs. And we haven't even talked about how Oppenheimer does have the discussion of H bombs.
That is true. Yeah. I mean, it is an important distinction that Oppenheimer created the A bomb,
Yes.
but somewhat opposed the H bomb, or they're called supers, in the film. And I do think people tend to forget that Japanese citizens have been killed by both.
Yes.
Uh,
And that was the huge part of 54 was the Lucky Dragon number 5 incident, the incident where Japanese fishermen were were irradiated by the Castle Bravo testings on March 1st, and they passed away from that. And that caused a huge international turmoil because Japanese critics were saying, why this? Like, why is it Japanese citizens are being killed once again by these weapons of mass destruction? And it caused a lot of friction. And in the film, you see the beginning of the H bomb because I'm pretty sure, aren't they represented by the two fish bowls in that meeting where the tiny wine glass is the A bomb and the huge fish bowl is the H bomb? Am I correct with that?
no, it was they had one was plutonium
Gotcha.
and the other was something else. It was like how much they were manufacturing at the time to put into their current bomb
Okay.
or gadget.
But they do make it very clear that the H bomb is way more powerful and could cause way more.
Yeah, and it was I think it was Tiller who proposed the idea of a hydrogen bomb instead of an atom bomb. Everyone laughed him off. And Oppenheimer suggested that there were too many issues in making it work, but of course it did end up working. I just think he wanted to kind of steer away from that. He said it was poor use of our resources. A better use of our resources should be toward arms control.
Yeah.
But instead we got an arms race.
Right. Now, eventually, we did get to a point where arms control was a thing. There was it was an act, I believe, passed by NATO that it was the countries with nuclear warheads had to decommission them, and it was something that has been a development primarily between America and Russia, the two super powers of the world that have, just stockpiles of nuclear warheads.
Right. And it was actually was it before? No, it had to be after. I believe it was after the Tsar Bomba.
I think so.
Russia's the largest hydrogen bomb detonation in history. So powerful, so large that there's still, ice, in Russia that's irradiated near Alaska. Some places are still uninhabitable. It was exploded in the air. This thing was massive. And what's even more terrifying about this is initially, I think, don't quote me on this, I'm pretty sure it was supposed to be even more powerful. They cut the power in half before detonation. I watched like 2-3 hours of like the declassified stuff, much of which is just them loading it and staff involved and flying the plane and whatnot. But it was still jarring to watch, especially when the clouds light up. And it was just so powerful, it was so violent that's when I believe the UN said, okay, no more tests. It's getting out of control, and you're gonna kill us all. And that one was terrifying. I sometimes can't believe I'm willing to admit this. I will watch atomic tests on like YouTube and stuff like that, basically just to frighten myself. because they are. I mean, how did we get away with making this stuff? And that's again what this movie is about.
And I like in the movie how they relate the bomb, the atom bomb, and all the atomic bombs to Prometheus giving men fire.
Men fire, right?
And that comparison was really I really appreciated that. And I like that because I feel like that's Oppenheimer. And they say you're the new Prometheus.
The American Prometheus is what they call it. Yeah. That was...
And like knowing, and I'm pretty sure, don't they include the quote of Prometheus gave man fire in the beginning?
At the very beginning. Yep.
So the fact that they tied that off at the end with that statement kind of made it even more impactful. The fact that he basically did. He gave man a new fire that would burn everything in existence. To kind of quote Final Wars. But I mean, that I've always thought about that in that movie. There, in the dub at least, there is that line of "man made a huge fire, you see, and it burned everything in existence." And this movie really like puts that into perspective, like how that could happen. And you said you told me on that phone call you might not be able to watch films that include the atomic bomb the same way anymore,
right?
And like. That line now means so much more. Like there is Nolan has defined the fear of nuclear weapons to the modern audience that I think we have lost.
Yeah,
because
I agree.
I've argued this point. So as somebody who has grown up in this 21st century. We have never had the fear of a bomb going off. There used to be the in schools they would teach you to like duck and cover because of an atomic bomb, and they had bomb shelters. That doesn't exist anymore. There is no longer the fear of nuclear weapons, nuclear war. That has disappeared for the most part. Now, I remember in like 7th and 8th grade, there was the fear of North Korea and what they were doing with their missiles and that fear, but it kind of disappeared. Like, as at least for me, like I remember that being very, very much a topic in about 7th grade, but by 8th grade, it was like, it's over. Like, there's nothing to fear. But at any moment, that could happen. And I remember, I believe it was 2020 when Ukraine and Russia started that problem. That fear came back. But it also feels like as time has gone on, the reports and the fear of that has disappeared as well. Even though it's still happening, there are still issues.
Yeah, it's the news is only going to report what's hot
Right
at the moment, right? People have said we've exited the atomic age and entered the digital age. The atomic age never went anywhere. I liken it to the line in Shin Godzilla where they say, man, we're quoting Godzilla a lot here. I guess that makes sense, but in Shin Godzilla when they said post-war lasts forever, the atomic age ain't going anywhere. It's still here. And I think this movie, I don't think it shows or says why. I think it gives us an experience as to why. It makes us feel why. And that's hard to do.
Right.
That's hard to do. So props to this movie and the filmmakers.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think this film, while it's a period piece, it takes place, hard in the early 40s, early to mid 40s. and then later on in the 60s, correct? Or late 50s? The trial specifically.
The 50s, yeah.
50s? Okay. It's very much established over 70 years ago. The films...
Ooh, wait. Late 50s, early 60s. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Some of it probably is the 60s, now that I think about it.
So the fact that is still relevant is horrifying. We like you said, we have never moved out of that. There are world powers that could bring that back tomorrow. Like we and like you said, that is the fear of like the dumb people who run the world could bring that back tomorrow. Like they could bring it back the moment the stream ends. They could bring it back right now. Like that is a fear that may never go away. Because Oppenheimer gave us that. Whether he definitely realized it after the fact, but there's no going back. Once, I'm trying to remember, I want to say it might have been in a Godzilla movie, but it was the establishment of once that power is here, it can never go away. Do you know what I'm talking about? I feel like I'm about to think of what it is, but it was the thought of now that it was Destroya, Godzilla versus Destroya, how they bring up micro oxygen, and how that power is here, and there is no way to take that back. And the Oxygen Destroyer is kind of, I would say, the franchise Godzilla franchise's atomic bomb. I feel like it was always supposed to be that. And Destroyer, they kind of bring that concept back where it can never go away.
Right. I think it was Dr. Ijun, I believe, who says like micro oxygen has already been unleashed. It's too late. And the discussion about what to do with an oxygen destroyer or Destroya, they start weighing, which monster, which device, whatever, will determine the lesser cost of lives, not unlike the discussion about, bombing Hiroshima and Nagasaki and stuff like that. So, which, that came during the anniversary of, was it the 50th anniversary? I think it was the 50th anniversary of the bombings.
Yes.
Was 1995?
Yes, that would be 51.
Yeah,
50,
that would be
50. 50.
Yeah, 50th anniversary of that. So, the fact that movie came out in that year with a discussion kind of similar to that really speaks to some of that movie's strengths and, a reality that, we could continue to have that discussion.
Right.
Today.
No, it's kind of nice that, at least for me, I feel like I can now view some of this stuff in a different light, because now I have been, as a modern audience member, now I have a better understanding. I've understood the fear of the bomb, but I've never truly felt it. And you and I both,
afraid of it. Right.
Yes, and both you and I both said this is not a movie you watch, it's a movie you experience. And it leaves you with something that it's a sour taste, but it's a, air quotes, good. It's good that it leaves you with a sour taste.
Well, yeah, it does its job.
Yes.
Extraordinarily well. It does its job. I have yet to call this I've yet to just say it's a good movie.
Right.
And I've yet to just say it's, I've yet to rank it or anything like that. And I probably won't, because I feel like it's just so transcendent. And that, you know, everything that came along with experiencing it, it would be reductive to praise or criticize it with the usual vernacular you would for film discussion. And I think that's where it comes in. I remember there's some video out there where Christopher Nolan reads, someone said, "My life is like a Christopher Nolan film. I don't really understand what's going on, but I'm here for it anyway." And someone asked him, "What do you say? What would you say to that person?" And Nolan said, "My advice would be, don't try to understand it, just feel it."
That's pretty good.
You know? So it's I don't know if it's accurate to say you understand a movie, but you feel an experience, but it kind of sounds like a cool quote, so I'll say it. I think what Oppenheimer does, we probably won't get that out of another movie for a long time.
Yes, I agree.
And I hope, as I continue to struggle finding the correct vernacular to describe it, I hope we eventually land on an agreeable word or phrase to pinpoint just how effective this movie is in igniting emotion and discussion.
So I'm gonna catch up on the chat here a little bit.
Okay.
And then if you want to, we can go ahead and wrap up with just overall basic thoughts. I feel like
absolutely.
it's hard to summarize it all, and then we'll wrap up with our plugs and call it here. I feel like we've went in some deep holes here. And
yeah, I didn't expect that. I was
and you know, and anybody who's listening to this, I do want to establish, I don't mean anything about comparing Godzilla and bringing Godzilla up. It's just that we are kaiju fans, and it's nice to see the symbolism in these kaiju movies that, for me, seems a little more clear now with this better understanding. Nolan did a great job showcasing to a modern audience how all of this impacts the world to me. So with that, I'm going to catch up on our comments here, and then we're going to go ahead and wrap things up here. So Nathan Marchand is in the chat. Hi guys, Prometheus was the stated symbol, but you also had the apple at the beginning that was poisoned and could be a symbol of the forbidden fruit in Eden that imparted knowledge of good and evil. That's actually a very interesting comparison that I'd never really thought of.
I think, you know, the reason Prometheus was chosen as a more direct correlation to Oppenheimer is simply because of the connection, something that fire that fire has to the bomb and its effects. You know, the one thing we didn't mention about the Prometheus quote was that Prometheus was condemned to hell and tortured for all eternity for giving fire to man. And
Oppenheimer kind of has his own damnation.
Yeah.
Mentally.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which is, you know, that's something that, you know, he never came back from.
Mm-hmm.
And so we actually never brought up how at the end Einstein tells Oppenheimer that, you know, they will hate you, but eventually they will praise you for what you've done. And we see into the future where Oppenheimer's accepting, is that a Purple Heart? I think
it's not Purple Heart. Purple Heart would be, I believe, if he was injured in the line of duty.
Okay.
I want to say it was the Nobel Peace Prize, but I don't think it was. It was the here it is. The Enrico Fermi Award, a scientific award given by the President of the United States, honoring scientists of international stature for their lifetime achievement in development, use, or production of energy.
Okay.
This would factor.
And it's an interesting, like, because the whole film we follow the trial and trying to put Oppenheimer in this negative light. He's the villain. He doesn't deserve it. What he did isn't enough, and they try to really put him as the villain. But as time goes on,
they forgive him.
But
they forgive him for themselves.
Right.
They wouldn't stand up for him when he needed it to make themselves feel better, just like Einstein predicted.
And I want to say there's another movie that kind of follows that, where it's like, before you fall, they will love you, but when you fall from grace, you're nothing to them. And I'm trying to remember what movie that is, because
kind of sounds like a Dead Poet Society quote, but I'm not entirely sure that's accurate.
I don't remember, but I know there's a movie that they bring that up, where when, like, if you fall from grace, they will turn your backs. The movie's starting to get clear in my head. Oh my god, I know this movie. They will turn their back on you the moment they can. Or no, maybe it's an Eminem song. It's an Eminem song. It's there's an Eminem song where he says, like, once they turn on you, they're never coming back. And that's kind of true. That's kind of true. But in this case, they eventually forgive him. But I love how his wife doesn't forgive them, and she refuses to shake their hands. That I loved that. And they linger on that. They linger on that to show, like, she never forgot what they did.
She never forgot. And at the same time, it's interesting. She didn't think this would happen either, because she told Oppenheimer, do you think if they tar and feather you, that eventually they'll forgive you or praise you? They won't. And he's like, we'll see.
Yeah. So yeah, no, it's very interesting how they tackle that subject. Jumping back in here into the messages, Nathan also said, I lived through the tail end of the Cold War, but I don't remember feeling afraid. I was too young. And that's kind of where I came from, is like, I by the time I was born, the Cold War was, history. And so to me, like, that never really was something that...
Right. And I lived through a little bit of the Cold War too, but it was never...
it was a thing that happened, and
yeah. I think in the 50s, when nuclear, tests were happening, 50s and 60s when nuclear tests were happening and whatnot, there was probably a stronger fear of it happening because it was so new and fresh at the time, and the Cold War continued on all the way through these other, like, important events and conflicts in history. I mean, you got the Vietnam War as well, but we were still in the middle of the Cold War as that was going on. But you mentioned that the news hasn't been talking too much about Russia lately, even though it's still happening and whatnot. Well, it's the same thing. The Cold War ended up being less cool after so many years.
Right.
It only really popped back up into public perception when it was all starting to wrap up. And even then, I was too, self-absorbed to care about what was going on in that. So I didn't. Nothing I remember.
Right. Nathan also said the ending struck him. There's the term again, struck.
Yeah.
I'd never thought of the chain reaction that ignited the atmosphere being a metaphor
For the
for the atomic age. As it spreads, that's actually a good idea. Like as atomic energy and atomic weapons.
And you know what? That ending. One of the reasons it haunts me is it just in his head? Is it a dream? Is it a future where maybe we actually do ignite the atmosphere, or is it just a metaphor for the spread of nuclear power and weapons? Yes to all, maybe. I don't know but the fact that we ask these questions and we wonder and consider it is so important, and again, effective. We've overused that word plenty, but it is.
And then Nathan also echoes Godzilla versus Destroyer brings up the chain reaction from the atomic detonation.
No, yeah, it does.
And then he asked us, would you say this is Nolan's magnum ops?
I guess that's for me, given I've seen his full library. My answer would be, ask me again, first of all, when I've kind of come down from the honeymoon period. But at the same time, I'm always hesitant to call anyone's one work their magnum opus because first of all, you don't know what's going to come next, and second of all, I don't want to be reductive to other films that I think are absolutely bangers as well. I mean, it's just hard to say. Would I probably say this is one of Nolan's best movies? Yeah, I can give you that much. I can definitely give you that much. Is it his greatest? I don't know. We'll see. Time will tell. I think that's something best left to cinema history than it is to any one person who's seen it 3 days after it's come out.
So I'm just going to bring this up. So the Fabelmans and Oppenheimer both had a similar effect on me. I've already established that. I need to watch it again, and I'm kind of in a honeymoon phase. But I almost feel like this might be top 10 movies of all time for me. I don't know yet. It has some films to beat. The Fabelmans is my second favorite film of all time. And this kind of left an impact similar to that. So it's gonna take me a long time to figure out where this sits for me, because this movie, I'm going to rewatch this movie. I might go to the theaters this week and watch it again. I'm definitely purchasing it on 4K when it comes out. I would love if Nolan has a commentary. I'd love to hear him talk about this movie.
He won't.
He won't. Does he not do commentaries?
He doesn't do commentaries.
Oh, that's the.
And here's why. Here's why he doesn't want to. He doesn't want to take away from the magic of these films. He doesn't want to take away from our own thoughts on the films either. And I've thought the same thing, but again, this is a filmmaker who trusts his audience almost to a fault. And I think, if Nolan were sitting here watching this live stream and us two talking about his film like this, he would be, any filmmaker would love that. But I think he especially would love it simply because this is exactly what he wants his movies to do, is to be functional without a commentary and people saying things that he may or may not say
Right.
in a commentary for it.
That's true. So, I, as somebody who has not watched a lot of Nolan's filmography, this movie hit harder than I ever thought it would have. Like, thinking about it, like Tetsuo the Iron Man is another movie that I remember sitting there thinking, this changed my life. And Oppenheimer, I think, did something similar. So it's gonna, honestly, this definitely will probably hit top 10 for me.
I mean, it's not the first Nolan movie to do that for me. And I told you the other night that Nolan, I got into Nolan back in 2001 when when Memento came out.
Before he was cool.
Before he was cool, yeah. When Memento came out, and I walked out of the theater, and to this day I can't believe I said this out loud, but I was with friends, and I just, it was one of those I'm thinking out loud moments, and I just spouted out loud, that's one of the best movies I've ever seen. And I was also in a very different place at that point in time too. I think a lot of the themes, fairly nihilistic themes, in there really had a vice grip on me. But so many years later, I mean, I go back to it, I watch it, and I'm just like, man, this is such a fantastic film. Once again, non-linear storytelling and black and white and color film, and an ending that hits hard. And in some ways he hasn't changed that much, but in other ways he's also matured a lot as well, and now has the latitude to do a lot more. And whether you like the Dark Knight movies or not, you have to appreciate that it gave him the ability to have that kind of latitude.
Right. That kind of, to my understanding, that's what shot him into kind of stars.
Yes. I would say so. And I think, I really do think that if you probably go through his library, starting with the following, if you go through his filmography one by one, you would probably end up appreciating, yes, I just brought that up. You would probably end up appreciating what he ended up doing in The Dark Knight a little bit more, and how his filmmaking had progressed over years and whatnot. Because I think you'll probably end up, I can understanding, like, someone who hasn't seen a lot of Nolan films watching the Dark Knight movies and probably comparing them more so to the superhero genre at present, essentially, and not a Nolan crime drama or a Nolan war picture or something of that likeness, which is what I kind of follow along into when I went to see those movies, is that the Dark Knight movies weren't really comic book movies. They were an extension of this filmmaker's evolution. So, as pretentious as that sounds, I mean, I can't be too pretentious. We've been talking about nuclear horror, and I'm here chomping down on peanut M&Ms. So, but I really do think you would enjoy his filmography, especially the evolution leading up to Oppenheimer. And I, for one, once again, cannot wait to see what his next project is.
So with that, I feel like that's kind of I mean, we've been sitting here for 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
And I feel like we've kind of, I mean, I dove into this way more than I thought I would. I'm kind of happy I was able to formulate some of the thoughts that when I saw this, I just kept telling Ricks, I've just seen cinema. I've just watched film. Like I couldn't fathom what I had just seen. So I'm happy that I'm able to sit here now and be able to formulate kind of the thoughts that, I mean, I felt like Oppenheimer in the moment of I saw the quantum realm, but to me it was, I'm seeing a masterpiece. film is something very near and dear to me. So while watching it, I felt like my eyes were wide open. I was just staring at the screen, just taking in something that would leave an impact on me that I didn't expect. So, I'm probably still in the honeymoon phase, like you.
Yeah, and that's okay. That's okay, and I'll come down from it, but I don't see it even coming out of it. Normally, when I'm in the honeymoon phase, I can tell where I'm heading.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see myself wavering too much from my current opinion.
Right. And I'm in the same boat. I don't see myself changing my views. This was this is a great movie. Like that, if I have to sum up my thoughts in like a sentence, this is a great movie.
I think my only thought is that, I don't want to parrot Nolan's words. Don't think about it too hard, just feel it too much. But and someone once said, man, you really just have to experience it. I know that's cheesy to say, but it really is. You just have to experience it. I'm like, I don't think it's cheesy at all. I think it is an experience. And I think that this is a film. This is the reason I fell so in love with film. And I think part of me had kind of forgotten that.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily because films are just so bad these days, but largely because so many of them kind of look and feel the same.
Mm-hmm.
And this really had everything that I love about movies in it.
Right. It shows the power of cinema. And
I mean, it shows that like the art form as an art form can still make an impression for me.
Right.
And I only hope I don't have to wait so many years to experience something like it again. Yeah.
That's a good note to end on.
Yeah.
So, after 2 hours and 40 minutes of talking about this and diving in, for anybody who's been watching, thank you for listening to us kind of dive into like the madness in our heads about this movie and what it did. And for anybody who's been listening, thank you for listening. I hope for the ones who have seen it, I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. If you didn't, I don't necessarily agree, but
we pity you.
Yeah, we do. So I'm grateful for being able to have this opportunity, Jack, to sit down with you after watching it and being able to really just talk about what this movie means to us. In all honesty, this wasn't necessarily a review, I feel, as much as it was how it feels. Not necessarily
We
how.
gushed.
Yeah.
We gushed over it, which is fine. I remember one time I was listening to a podcast on Slash Film in 2008, and Kevin Smith was the guest star on the Slash Film podcast. It was about The Dark Knight. And the people running the podcast was like, all right, let's start with the synopsis and we'll go over the actors. And Kevin Smith chimes in. He goes, man, let's forget about the synopsis. Let's not talk about who's in it. Let's just talk about how much we love this movie, man. Let's just go. I mean, and honestly, it made for the more interesting review or discussion. And I think in gushing over it, we've touched on things that are worthwhile. Maybe even a little personal. And that's more real than some reviews, which tend to checklist themselves as, well, the acting was good and the effects were good and the writing was not as good, but also, just things like that don't do anything for me.
So this has been great. Thank you so much for doing this. I mean, we did a kind of short notice, but we made it work, and I think we did something great here. So with that being said, now's the time for you to promote yourself.
Okay.
And whatever you do.
Well, I am Jack Hudgens. I eat peanut M&Ms. You can find them at your local Walmart, Target, Bi-Lo, Food Lion, Ralph's, and Kroger's. They are 17 grams of oh, jeez. I need to stop. All right, so I got to run tomorrow. Jack Hudgens. You can find me on Twitter at Gman of Mysterioid. You can also check out my Substack, which is Deferential Wrath of a Rusting Markalite Cannon, at markalite.substack.com. I was one of the 4 hosts on the Drift Space, which you can find on all your podcatchers, Spotify, Apple, whatever. We are currently on an indefinite hiatus. When or if it will come back is unknown, but I am also in early discussions of maybe potentially being a part of another in the future. We'll see. I don't know. But I'll let you know when the time is right and when it's right for me. And that's the main thing, is that I have to make sure it's right for me. So catch me on all that.
Alrighty, and I'm Elijah Thomas. You can find me on YouTube at ET13 Productions, on Twitter at ET13 Productions, or on Instagram at ET13 Productions. I do have an upcoming short film that debuted at G-Fest titled SOS Seek Shelter, that if you're interested, just keep an eye out on the YouTube channel because I will be posting it eventually. And besides that, you can, if you want to find my personals, you can find them. It's not hard. I don't hide myself like I used to, but as for the podcast, if you'd like to support the podcast and in the YouTube channel, don't forget to rate us on iTunes. That boosts our ratings and helps us get recommended to more people just like you. If you don't have an Apple device, which I don't blame you, I don't. That's actually very much a lie. I'm using a MacBook right now, so this is all that's a lie. So. But you can rate us on Spotify now. We have 5 reviews. Or 6 reviews. We're at a 5-star rating. So thanks to everybody who has left us a review. If you want to stay up to date with all things Kaiju Conversation related, follow us on Twitter at KAIJU_CONVERS. If you don't have a Twitter, you can follow us on Instagram or like us on Facebook. If you're like me before podcasting and you don't have any social media, lucky you. You can email us at kaijuconversation@gmail.com, all lowercase, all one word, you know the drill. And as always, we'll read your reviews on air for everyone to hear. We also have a Teespring store. Eventually, we'll have original artwork on there, but until then, you can sport our awesome logo on a t-shirt or maybe even have it on a coffee mug. If you'd like to chat with actually either of us, you can check out the Discord server for Kaiju Conversation, full of others that have similar interests to you. It's a great community full of great people. We have some great conversations on there. Don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel and hit the bell so you can be notified anytime we upload a video. Sometimes we post mini-sodes or bloopers for the episodes talking about, whatever we have. We also have an interview with Mechagodzilla designer Jared Krzyzewski on the channel. I probably butchered his name, and I apologize. But you also have these monthly live streams, Kaiju Conversation Live, a monthly show that is typically not very high energy or like deep. This episode is a little different from that, but it was something that definitely needed to happen. And if you're listening, this is one of the rare instances where we're going to upload the live streams as a bonus episode. So if you haven't already, subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can watch and listen to all of these, because there's some really good conversations that come out of this show. A huge thanks to Rex for editing all of the episodes and all the other content we upload. His links can be found in the description below. Along with Rex, we'd like to give a huge thanks and shout out to Danny DeManna of the Godzilla Novelization Project for his amazing vocals on our theme song. You can support him by following him on Twitter at Danzilla93_GNP or visit his website, GodzillaNovelizationProject.com. And a huge thanks to Gratton Conwell from the podcast Giant Monster BS for composing the music for our theme song. You can support him by following the podcast on Twitter at Giant Monster BS or on any podcast platform under the name Giant Monster BS. And with that, we're going to wrap things up here. So thank you guys so much for watching us or listening to us, whichever way you did. I really appreciate it. Thanks again, Jack, for coming on and talking about this movie. It was a ton of fun, and I enjoyed it very much.
I did too. Thanks for inviting me.
Always. It's always a pleasure to have you on. So with that, I just want to remind everybody to please remember, life's too short to not talk big. Bye, guys.